This is Lionel Messi, the greatest footballer who ever lived, crying because the club he joined at 13 years old, the club he gave everything to, can no longer afford to keep him. Not because he wanted to leave. Not because of football. Because of a number. 1.35 billion euros. 1.35 billion euros in debt. A negative net worth of minus 451 million euros. A wage bill consuming 103% of everything the club earned. FC Barcelona, the most commercially powerful football club on the planet, was, by their own general director's words, technically bankrupt. This is the story of how they got there and whether they ever truly came back. 6 trophies in a single year. The best player on earth. The best stadium in Europe. Revenue of over 900 million euros, more than any sports club in history. In 2015, Forbes valued FC Barcelona at 3.16 billion euros. They weren't just a football club. They were a financial empire. So what went wrong? It started, as so many catastrophes do, with a single phone call. Even at the height of their powers, Barcelona's wage bill was growing faster than their revenue. In 2017-18 alone, wages hit 639 million euros, and that was only kept manageable by one extraordinary piece of luck. A piece of luck that was about to end. In August 2017, Paris Saint-Germain triggered a release clause. And everything changed. PSG paid 222 million euros for Neymar. The biggest transfer fee in football history. Barcelona were publicly furious. Privately, they had 222 million euros they'd never expected. And here's what almost no one talks about: that money didn't save Barcelona. It destroyed them. Because it gave them the budget to make 3 of the worst signings in the history of football, back to back to back. First, an unproven 20-year-old from Dortmund. Cost 148 million euros. Ousmane Dembélé. 20 years old. One good season at Dortmund. Barcelona paid 105 million euros up front for a player who would spend more time in the treatment room than on the pitch. 141 matches missed through injury across 6 years. Dortmund knew exactly what they had, and exactly what Barcelona were willing to pay in a panic. But Dembélé was just the warm-up. Philippe Coutinho. Liverpool had refused to sell him all summer. Their resolve was firm, until Barcelona made it financially impossible to say no. Total, approximately 160 million euros. The most expensive signing in Barcelona's history. He made 106 appearances. Scored 25 goals. Was booed by his own fans. Then loaned to Bayern Munich, who didn't want to buy him. Barcelona had paid 160 million euros for a player they eventually gave away. And then came Griezmann. 120 million euros. Signed in July 2019. But here's the detail that stops you in your tracks. According to Barcelona's own forensic audit, on the very night they signed Antoine Griezmann, the board realized they didn't have enough money to complete the deal. They signed a 120 million euro player. Then looked at the accounts. And discovered they couldn't afford him. That is not a football club being ambitious. That is a football club that had completely lost its grip on reality. 3 transfers. 400 million euros spent. Less than 90 million euros recovered when selling them. But the transfers were only half the problem. You might be wondering, where was the board? The auditors? The financial controls? Here's what almost nobody talks about. Barcelona is not owned by a billionaire with their own money on the line. It's owned by its members, over 144,000 of them, who vote for a president. And presidents who win elections by promising trophies don't get re-elected by saying no to signings. In a democracy, short-termism is always politically rational. And at Barcelona, it was financially suicidal. And then, just as the cracks were impossible to ignore, the world shut down. March 2020. The pandemic hits. Camp Nou goes dark. 99,000 empty seats every 2 weeks. Matchday revenue, gone. But here's the brutal truth that gets buried in every lazy retelling of this story. COVID didn't cause Barcelona's crisis. It simply removed the one thing that had been masking it, cash. Because while revenue collapsed, operating expenses hit a record €1.136 billion. The highest in club history. In the same year the club earned the least. And the sporting results told the same story. August 2020. Lisbon. FC Barcelona vs Bayern Munich. Champions League quarter-final. The final score, 8-2. Barcelona's heaviest defeat in over 80 years. This wasn't just a bad result. It was a balance sheet made visible, every overpriced, aging, underperforming signing Bartomeu had made, exposed on the biggest stage in football. 2 months later, Bartomeu was gone. October 2020. Facing a vote of no confidence, Josep Maria Bartomeu resigned before the members could remove him. He left behind €1.35 billion in debt, a wage bill at 103% of revenue, 3 failed marquee signings, and the world's greatest player entering the final year of his contract. The next man through the door had an almost impossible job. Joan Laporta won the presidential election in March 2021. What he found when he opened the books was worse than anyone had publicly admitted. Laporta commissioned a forensic audit. When the results came back, the club's own general director stood at a podium and said words that had never been spoken about FC Barcelona in 121 years of history. The club was, quote, technically bankrupt. The debt breakdown, €617 million base debt. €389 million owed on player transfers. €90 million in ongoing litigation. €79 million in advanced TV rights already spent. €56 million on the stadium project. Total, €1.35 billion. With €730 million of that payable within 12 months. And then, a newspaper published something that made everything worse. In January 2021, Spanish newspaper El Mundo published Lionel Messi's contract. The headline, Messi's pharaonic contract that ruined Barcelona. The numbers inside were extraordinary. €138 million per year, fixed. €115 million paid to Messi simply for accepting the renewal. Not for goals. Not for trophies. For picking up a pen. Total maximum value over 4 years, €555,237,619. The largest contract ever signed by any athlete in any sport in history. Signed, in 2017, by the same board that 3 years later couldn't afford a €120 million striker. And then came the moment that made it all real. August 2021. Messi had agreed to a 50% pay cut. He wanted to stay. La Liga's financial fair play rules made it mathematically impossible to register his contract. Barcelona could not afford the player they had paid €500 million. He walked out the door. For free. Barcelona received nothing. Not a single euro. One brief addition, because the financial scandal wasn't the only one. Investigators were simultaneously examining allegations that Barcelona had paid €8.4 million to a figure connected to Spanish refereeing over 17 years. A case formally charged in October 2025. Still working through the courts. The reputational damage, incalculable. Laporta needed money. Fast. His solution was unprecedented. First, he sold 25% of Barcelona's La Liga television rights for the next 25 years to American investment firm 6th Street. €207.5 million, immediately. Then, 49.9% of the club's licensing and merchandising division. Then, 2 separate 24.5% stakes in Barca Studios, the club's media arm, to a cryptocurrency platform and a media company for NFTs and the metaverse. The spending cap went from -€144 million to +€656 million. Same summer, Lewandowski, Rafinha, Count. The fans were euphoric. But wait. Look at the numbers more carefully. Here's what the celebrations missed. Selling 25% of your TV rights for 25 years doesn't generate revenue. It borrows from your own future. Barcelona receive €40 to €52 million less in broadcast income than they otherwise would. Without the accounting benefit of the levers, Barcelona would have posted a €377 million loss in 2022-23, not the profit the headline celebrated. One source told ESPN directly, the levers are a case of bread today, hunger tomorrow. So, where does that leave Barcelona today? November 22, 2025. Barcelona walked back into their renovated Camp Nou after 900 days playing in a smaller stadium across the city. They beat Athletic Bilbao 4-0. They had won La Liga in 2022-23 and again in 2024-25. Xavi's side, then Flick's side. On the pitch, there were genuine signs of life. Smart signings. A functional squad. A club that looked, at least superficially, like it had turned a corner. But behind the celebrations, the numbers told a different story. In January 2026, Barcelona's total debt stands at €1.958 billion. Higher than at the peak of the crisis in 2021. The club still owes €159 million to other clubs from old transfers. And the TV rights they sold? Gone for another 22 years. So what does any of this actually mean? 3 lessons from the most expensive financial disaster in football history. 1. Panic is the most expensive emotion in any market. 2. In a democracy, short-termism is always politically rational and eventually financially suicidal. 3. Debt doesn't disappear. It migrates. Which brings us to the only question that actually matters now. Barcelona are back at Camp Nou. The stadium is beautiful. The team is winning. And the debt is nearly €2 billion, and climbing. The question isn't whether Barcelona survived their crisis. They did, just about. The real question is whether the decisions being made today are building the next one. Because at this club, they've been here before. They just called it something different. They called it ambition.